Hey friends, I'm Matt Elfring, and I occasionally do a podcast called Casual Yelling. And on December 10th, 2024, I received a video from WWE's Paul Heyman yelling at me and my podcast. Now, the video title for this video is a little misleading, but then again, so is all of YouTube. So let's briefly talk about Paul Heyman as streamlined as possible, because he's had a long and storied career throughout professional wrestling. And we just kind of want a bite-sized thing to say like, hey, this guy's important. You should know more about him. If you're unfamiliar but watch wrestling, I'm very confused with how you don't know who Paul Heyman is. Heyman was a young photographer and writer for pro wrestling during the 1980s. He then became a manager known as Paul E. Dangerously, most notably in WCW. He left WCW and worked at Eastern Championship Wrestling, which eventually became known as Extreme Championship Wrestling, ECW. WWE eventually bought ECW and Heyman came over. Fast forwarding just like a little bit. So like Heyman would become a manager for a wrestler that was about to become the spotlight of WWE programming, and Heyman was the mouthpiece for that character. Most notably during this time, it was Brock Lesnar and CM Punk. In 2020, Heyman returned playing the role of the wise man to Roman Reigns. Reigns and Heyman were building up the most important faction of the COVID and post-COVID era in WWE, the Bloodline. They're a wrestling family that dominates WWE programming from 2020 onward to right now. That's the briefest I could talk about Paul Heyman, because he's the most important on-screen non-wrestler character in the history of the sport. I'm calling it a sport. Like, you try taking a bump onto a mat all while trying to perform these athletic moves, make it look believable to the audience. It's a sport. Now back to my podcast, Casual Yelling. It was once a conversational interview podcast where I just talked to people. And like, there were a few bigger names on there, Knowledge Fights, Jordan Holmes, and I talked to a lot of comedians like Matt Drufke, Jack Baker, Xavier Lamont. It was fun, but my heart was in wrestling. And I actually had wrestlers on. The Drama King, Matt Raywald, was on. And then I had Serpentico on a couple times, because Serpentico likes to yell about Nyla Rose. I'm going to give him a platform for that. Also, WWE 2K Games developer Brian Williams showed up on the show a couple times to talk about the game, and also to judge my wrestlers that I made in the game, because apparently I can do that. Now, I'm not a name dropper. I just did. But I'm about to drop a few names for you. When I was at GameSpot, Chris Hayner and I hosted this show, Wrestle Buddies, a podcast that was kind of funny and silly. We talked about the history of wrestling, what's going on in wrestling now. And then we interviewed a bunch of wrestlers. These wrestlers included the Good Brothers, Adam Cole when he was in WWE, Tyler Breeze, Johnny Gargano, Shayna Baszler, Nikki Cross, Becky Lynch, AJ Styles, Tamina, Naomi, Rhea Ripley, Braun Breaker, Xavier Woods, Big E, Kofi Kingston, and more. A lot of those wrestlers would come back on the show time and time again because they enjoyed having fun, except for Braun Breaker, because we asked him about his dad's feud with Chucky from Child's Play, and he didn't find that as funny as we did. So I received a text from WWE 2K Games PR, and the conversation went like this. If we can get a WWE star to record a liner for you, would you be interested? Yeah. Would there be anything you'd want this person to say specifically? Whatever, bro. They can say whatever they want, and I'll find it hilarious. Great, I'll have them cut a line for your podcast, Casual Yelling. All right, cool. Wait, for my podcast? Yep, that's the one. But no one listens to that. Too late. Here's what we shot.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul Heyman, and as your wise man, I'm here to bestow upon you the wisdom that you're listening to Casual Yelling with some jerk named Matt who likes to yell casually. If you're gonna yell, be passionate about it. Why does he yell casually? I don't understand the whole premise of this to begin with. Why am I being recorded for someone that yells casually?
After watching it, there's a little bit that I want to explain to Mr. Heyman about the podcast and my writing in general. And I'm 1000% sure that Mr. Heyman is watching this video right now because he's got all the spare time in the world. And who doesn't want to watch a YouTube channel, which the videos get dozens of views? First, you mentioned the premise of the show and how you didn't get it. I don't get the premise either. You know, it was originally a conversational podcast. Then it became more of an editorial opinion piece based on the writings I've done on Substack. But the name implies that I'm just kind of shooting my opinions out there in a casual way. I figure in a world where everyone screams their opinions as loud as possible over social media, the best way to get those ideas across to other people is to kind of have a casual conversation about it, or to just state what you think and let other people decide on what you think. You don't have to agree with me, but the idea is I'm going to put yourself in my shoes to kind of give you my perspective on how the world works and the things that I've seen and I know about, and I hope that you get something out of it. And I do all this in a casual conversation voice. I'm not looking down upon you. I'm not yelling at you. I'm not pointing the finger at you. Sometimes I am. But I want you to perceive life differently. You know, you don't live in a bubble. You live in a much larger world where there are people that experience life differently. As for yelling, I really don't do that. No, I don't do that. Sometimes I get stern with my son when he's doing something I don't like, that I've told him to do like 3 or 4 times. Like, by the way, clean up those Hot Wheels. I've told you twice. I don't sound like that at all. You get the point. You clean up your Hot Wheels. It's your responsibility. Okay, that was better. That sounded more like me talking to my son who is not listening. In the past of doing stand-up comedy as random different characters and as myself, I would yell a lot on stage at the audience. It was this cathartic way for me to get like my emotions out on stage, you know, those painful emotions. And it's kind of in the same way I'm assuming that the Mr. Heyman character does this. Get that anger out and just yell it into the ether, not directed at any individual, but directed at the world around you. The last point I want to address is that Mr. Heyman called me a jerk. I don't think I'm a jerk. My wife says I'm one of the nicest people she's ever met, and she's met 7 people. I think we all have our jerk tendencies. It's like it's buried under the facades and mask of like pain and anguish and anger and mistrust and everything that we negatively feel, or we perceive we negatively feel. Feelings are subjective from culture to culture. You can change those feelings based on getting help or changing your own mindset. But if you act upon those things in a public forum or public setting, you are perceived as a jerk yourself. So there's someone out there watching this right now thinking that jerk Matt Elfring is a jerk. What a jerk. Jerk also refers to a seasoning and cooking style. And I love jerk chicken. And you are what you eat. And I'm a jerk.
Some jerk named Matt.
So that's it. Thanks, Paul Heyman, for recording a bumper for my podcast. I'm so confused on how this happened. I'm going to overuse it constantly.
Why am I being recorded for someone that yells casually?
And thanks WWE 2KPR for texting me about this. I'm confused how this happened. And if you want to casually yell with me or listen to me yell casually on Casual Yelling the Podcast, there's a link below to it on Apple Podcasts. And I'm also on Substack and Patreon and YouTube. You're on my YouTube. You know where all this is. I think this is where I tell you to subscribe or whatever. I'm 43. I'm tired. Anyways, all those links are below. This was an interesting day. Very surreal. Thank you. Bye.